Even as early as the 11th century, the Norwegian explorer Leif Erikson had already reached the Americas, which also made a few Europeans aware of the existence of the New World. Even so, at that time, Europe's economy was primarily agrarian and under the rule of the Roman Church. That dark, decadent social atmosphere stifled people's enthusiasm for exploring the New World. This sluggish state gradually improved only with the rise and steady development of the Renaissance. If one argues that the Renaissance fostered intellectual liberation and scientific progress, and was a crucial prerequisite for launching the Age of Exploration, then after the Black Death and over the course of a century, Europe's population gradually recovered, and commercial trade flourished, clearly becoming an important driving force for a new era. In fact, in the continuous evolution of human history, economic factors have always played a decisive role. Marco Polo's accounts portrayed an East overflowing with wealth, which captivated countless Europeans. However, Europeans at that time found it difficult to realize their dreams of wealth, because a group of Muslim powers stationed in the eastern Mediterranean stood like an iron wall across the trade routes between East and West, mercilessly cutting off Christians' access to wealth. At that time, trade from the East to the West had most of its profits first monopolized and divided by Muslims controlling the overland and mountain routes, and then the Mediterranean trade was monopolized by Genoa, as well as Genoese and Venetian merchants. When trade extended to Western Europe, business there had become unprofitable. For this primary reason, in order to avoid these Eastern vampires, they began to chase the traces of wealth legends. Portugal and Spain, smaller European nations, started urgently searching for new trade routes. Against this historical backdrop, a prominent and controversial name emerged on the historical stage. His name was Henry. As a Portuguese prince, Henry enthusiastically supported maritime endeavors. For example, by establishing a navigation school and implementing measures to promote navigation that ignited immense enthusiasm for overseas exploration in Portuguese society. Although his initial goal was not to open up routes to the east, but rather to explore the African coast and to establish a Christian empire there capable of countering the North African Muslims. In short, even though his exploratory intentions did not come to fruition, they exceeded his original dreams and had a tremendous impact on the course of history. Navigator Henry is thus hailed as the initiator of the Age of Discovery. However, the highly esteemed Henry in Portugal did not enjoy a good reputation in Africa. In 1441, under Henry's patronage, the Portuguese brought back the first batch of black slaves from Africa's western coast, and in Lisbon initiated what came to be seen as a symbol of sin: a large-scale European slave trade spanning 4 regions, thus marking its beginning. Henry ushered in a whole new era and had a profound influence on a nascent pioneer of navigation, namely the Genoese Christopher Columbus. Columbus was clearly a product of his time. A prime example, born into a middle-class family, Columbus originally planned to take over and inherit the family business and live a respectable life. But in an era when everyone talked about overseas wealth, who would be content with a conventional, mundane existence? Moreover, this man had been fascinated by the sea since childhood, and in his legendary life, his wife played a key role, because Columbus' father-in-law was once a captain under Prince Henry's command, named Bartolomeu Perestrello. Leveraging this connection, Columbus was able to directly partake in the achievements of Henry's maritime ventures. Achievements. It also pointed the way for his future journey in life, in order to explore the bizarre tales described by Enrique. Of course, also to seek the wealth of the East. Columbus, firmly convinced of his beliefs, planned a westward voyage toward the East. A massive expedition, but it was evident that this huge project required substantial financial backing, and he alone could not shoulder the burden. In order to secure funding, Columbus traveled among Paris, Lisbon, and London. After enduring numerous failures, Columbus finally won the support of Queen Isabella I of Spain in 1492. According to the agreement, Columbus and his descendants were to serve as governors for Spain's colonial ventures, working for Spain's overseas interests, and they would also receive profits from the colonial tier. In August 1492, Columbus set sail from the port of Palos, commanding 3 caravels, bearing his dreams and the expectations of the Spanish crown, and officially began his exploration of the unknown overseas. In September of that year, after passing the Canary Islands, in the early hours of October 12th, Columbus's fleet caught sight of a glimmer of light on the shore, and everyone was overjoyed because they believed it was the flickering light of the Indians. A historical moment was born, marking the first encounter between white men and Indians with similar skin tones. When Columbus saw these native people whose skin resembled that of Indians, he was convinced that he had indeed reached India, and he remarked that the locals were extremely backward, asserting that with just 50 men they could be easily conquered, claiming they had no faith and could be enslaved in the name of heathenism, while the arrogant stance of the white men seemed to presage a future era of bloodshed and turmoil on this continent. Because Columbus and his crew failed to find the eastern spices in the so-called India, this led many to question Columbus intensely. Yet Columbus refused to admit defeat. From 1493, after completing his first voyage to America, until 1504, Columbus completed 3 additional transatlantic voyages, leaving traces throughout the Caribbean, as well as in South and Central America. In 1506, the 55-year-old Columbus died in Valladolid, Spain. Columbus's voyages played a crucial historical role in the subsequent colonization of America, indisputably so, and one might argue that the names of these strange new lands should rightly be called the Columbus continents, which would seem more reasonable, but in fact, America was named the Americas. So why is that? That's a good question, because it is one of the most famous disputes in history. When Columbus reached America, he was convinced that he had landed in Asia, and not on a new continent. Although there were doubts about this, the truth remained hard to verify, which gave another explorer a rare moment in history. He was a Florentine, Amerigo Vespucci, and it is said that Amerigo had sailed with Columbus on several occasions, possibly even undertaking 3 expeditions along the South American coast. Unlike Columbus, Amerigo believed that this was a completely new continent, and he detailed his observations to his employer, namely, the prominent Florentine family, the Medici family, who, based on Amerigo's accounts, compiled records and widely disseminated them. When the renowned cartographer of the Holy Roman Empire, Martin Wald Seemuller, was drawing a new map of the world to name those lands situated between the Eurasian continents, the first name that came to his mind was, it is, in fact, the famous America. The Europeans at that time mostly learned of the New World through rumors about America, and not from Columbus. Thus the New World was named America, and that name is still used today. Columbus did not open up a direct route to the east for the Europeans, but inadvertently, a brand new opportunity for wealth emerged. This chance was accidentally discovered by the Europeans, in an unfamiliar continent claimed as their own, populated by backward peoples who could be easily conquered. What could be more thrilling than these signs? To those Europeans who considered themselves civilized, the first country to benefit from Columbus's discovery, naturally, was his patron. Spain established its first colony in Hispaniola in 1492. Spain's plundering in the Americas, and its colonial enterprise lasted for nearly 3 centuries. Spain's greedy exploitation devoured the continent's original resources and inflicted enormous devastation on the indigenous peoples. The Spaniards committed atrocities throughout the Americas. They fought, looted, and even kidnapped Indian wives and daughters, enslaved the Indians, and compounded by diseases brought by the Europeans. In less than 200 years after their arrival, the indigenous population of the Americas plummeted by over 70%. It is estimated that, from 1492 to 1650, the population dropped from about 90 million to roughly 20 million. As the leading power in Central America, the Aztec Empire, under the Spaniards' fierce bombardment, resisted for less than 3 years before meeting its end. After the fall of the Aztec capital Tenochtitlan, it was renamed Mexico City. Upon learning of the Aztec Empire's destruction, the neighboring Purépecha Empire, determined to avoid a similar fate, made overtures to the Spaniards by sending them gold, which in turn provoked an attack. The Spaniards, attracted by the gold of the Purépecha Empire, like wolves paying New Year's visits, in 1522, entered the Purépecha Empire, its capital resplendent, and, fearing the formidable might of the Spaniards, tens of thousands of Purépecha troops surrendered without a fight. The Purépecha Empire bowed and submitted to the Spaniards. In 1530, dissatisfied with the meager tribute offered by the Purépecha, the Spaniards renewed their invasion, and in that same year, they destroyed the empire. Moreover, these historical events, along with the myriad brutal actions carried out by the Spaniards in the Americas, were undoubtedly acts of plundering the continent's wealth. In their quest for gold, silver, and treasures, the Spaniards forced the indigenous peoples to submit and pay tribute. In short, the Spaniards were not interested in developing the local economy. They imposed trade monopolies on the colonies, suppressing free economic development. Furthermore, to facilitate centralized rule, the Spanish Empire also forced the indigenous population to adopt its religion, laws, and culture. This economic, political, and cultural influence exerted in the Americas largely led to Latin America falling behind and remaining unstable compared to the colonies of later European powers. By the end of the 16th century, with its plunder of the colonies and its monopolization of trade, Spain became the richest country in Europe at that time. It was the world's first empire on which the sun never set, allegedly controlling 83% of the world's gold and silver. However, these riches, plundered from the Americas, were too concentrated among Spain's elite, leaving the middle and lower classes of Spain with little benefit. The massive influx of gold and silver triggered the price revolution in 16th century Spain, causing severe inflation. It caused prices in Spain at the time to nearly quadruple. The soaring prices further hindered the development of Spain's industry, commerce, and export trade, coupled with Spain's frequent foreign wars and the heavy fiscal burden. Economic issues later became one of the key factors contributing to the decline of the Spanish Empire. When it comes to the various wars Spain engaged in during the 16th and 17th centuries, religious conflicts. Clearly, a key figure was Martin Luther. The Protestant Reformation initiated by Calvin and others, which undermined the dominant position of hypocritical and corrupt Catholic bishops in European society, and faced an unprecedented challenge from autocratic monarchs to industrialists, merchants, and commoners, pursuing their own interests and demands. Everyone participated in this socio-political movement cloaked in religious guise. This Reformation not only brought a tremendous shock to Europe's established order at the time, who would have thought that the American continent, thousands of kilometers away, would also be profoundly affected by this historical event.